So uh, we saw you shared this thing, and that's interesting because this is a classic thing that when we just focus on the user experience, we try to find mechanisms where those on Facebook and Twitter and all these kinds of platforms have a good experience. We don't realize that we end up providing a terrible experience to people who are responsible for cleaning up this kind of shit. So this is why experience is always a problematic angle because I mean, some person's good experience enabling that means some other person to sacrifice their good experience. So we thought we should talk rather more of a general or more of a background kind of a aspect that covers all these things, which is design. You know, and 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 talking about design, I think one of the things that like a is the part one, the screw UX, and the part two is talking about design. So in the UX part, it's there was an anecdote where I recently I used Lunch Club and I saw like Lunch Club email me and they do these things. All apps now do these things, saying congratulations, you 2 weeks in a row, amazing, you should do more. I mean, it's like I feel like I'm not a kid. I don't need to be like patted on the back all the time for everything. I know what I'm doing, and if I don't want to, I don't want to do. I don't want to mollycoddle. And even to the point that the way the language it says, that I am in, you know, how does that algorithm get to see I am in on my behalf? You know, I mean, I rather prefer this is called a conversational UX, right? User experience, which is talks to you. I rather prefer the 90s style software where it was like mechanical, because it was honest. It could say like sign up, that would be the button. It would not be actual sentence, and now it's like a proper sentence that it says as if it's like a person in the ghost in the machine. There's a person in the algorithm. And that in some ways helps them in a way that you don't feel you're being manipulated to sign up to Lunch Club and be more involved because you feel it's a person that is contacting. If it's algorithm, you would feel that's their logic. I don't know if it's true or false. Their rationale is at least people think it's a personal human touch by saying this kind of a human thing because who wants to be mollycoddled all the time, right?
Mm.
That's what they do. And this happened to Steve. I don't know, Steve, if you want to talk about this experience that you had.
Yeah. So uh, about last year for my birthday, I got a new Nespresso machine, um, and it was it was some new model that they have where they I don't know. It was just this new series that they just released, and it had on the box. I remember on the box it had the Wi-Fi logo, and I was just like wondering like why does it have a Wi-Fi logo? Like why would a coffee machine need Wi-Fi? I mean, obviously there's things you can think of, like automatically ordering new pods or something. I don't know, like whatever. But when I went through the manual, there was absolutely no. The only mention of the Wi-Fi was how to configure the machine to connect to your Wi-Fi network. But then there was absolutely nothing in the manual about what the Wi-Fi was for. Um, the the machine was detected. There was like an Espresso app on your phone, which kind of detected the machine on your network and kind of made this connection with it. But even then, like the app didn't let you do anything. Like there was no obvious reason why the Wi-Fi was there, um, and and like as someone in the industry, like I know that they probably had plans to do things with that, like maybe some sort of service, um, like if there was a problem with the machine, using it to notify Nespresso about the problem and all that kind of stuff. But as a consumer, it was just mysterious, right? Like it was just horrible to have this feeling of like, well, I've just connected it to my Wi-Fi network and it's giving me no features, right? Like there's nothing, no reason for that to have happened. Um, so I could go on, how problematic that was and how in the future that like never actually um, revealed itself as being something. Like it just continued to be featureless. It was just this Wi-Fi connection. But the point is that the situation it created is a result of just this thing we call UX design, where the focus was on making it nice and easy to get your machine connected to the Wi-Fi, but nobody thought about explaining why you were doing that. So yeah, that's that anecdote.
Yeah, and the weird thing is probably it might even be that when whoever is the manager, product leader of this product would come and talk to the UX guy in the company, they would be focused on making the whole connection, the app look very nice, make it very easy to connect, like automatically set the Bluetooth and everything, like super smooth, no friction, nothing. But they would never pause and think, but why would you even need that? Like, is anybody being benefited, or is it being done because we need more data about when Steve drinks coffee, how often he drinks coffee, so we can cater our products more accurately? So whose experience is being benefited? Certainly not Steve's. Probably the shareholders of Nespresso is being benefited because they now can be promised, just so you know, we will have a tailor-made product next year because we know what people want, why we are recording all the data. So if only you focus on making apps smooth and easy, you don't have the lens to even question these kind of political aspects of is it the company being benefited? Is it the users being benefited? And even like, I mean, this is the general industry view of user experience, which is the idea that the product is always supposed to be an uncomfortable intermediary. So it's like, the difference between, say, making coffee, like grinding the beans and water, everything. The way a UX principled person would argue for making an espresso over a manual coffee process, like automating it, is people don't want to grind their coffee. They don't want to boil the water. All they want is actually to have caffeine in their blood. Well, how can we make this? I want caffeine and I have caffeine in my blood. This the fastest. This whole process to take nothing but one. And that's automation. Basically get people exactly what they want to the actual product, the intermediary, like the product of the making the coffee and all of that becomes invisible. And which happens in both ways. So the word product means the device that you're using, and also means it's a product, like a multiplication, a product of many of the things. So product of grinding the thing, boiling the thing, everything. And as a result of it, what is produced is the caffeine in the blood. And they're like, what is produced is so important that all the in-between thing, it's just like a waste of time. So we want it to be like invisible. And that's, I mean, they do it in every way. So for example, when you want to have something like, say, you're on Facebook, you want to connect to people, the whole focus of UX would be there, that the point that people really want is to be able to stalk a friend, for example. All the thing in between to stalking, we should make it so easy that people won't even realize that it exists. Because when something is super easy, super smooth, super flowy, we don't recognize it's being there because it's just in the flow, in the momentum of it. And that does not allow both the users to recognize what they are doing, to recognize that there's actually a whole supply chain behind coffee, for example. People are working everything. It just seems like an automatic. Everything seems like blink of an. And so this is the general idea that comes down to it. Like they think the friction that, like, me wanting coffee and getting the coffee in my hand would be should is always bad. Like friction is always bad. But however, what is the case? It's more complicated than just saying friction is always bad. So you can look at it from a means and end kind of an angle. So say you're on the street and you're out in protests, and this is something I so see it a lot because I live in Republic, which is a place in Paris where they have all the protests and marches because it's a place where they have the Republic, the Statue of the Republic, they represent the Republic. So they all protest, and the police, uh, you know, attacks the protesters, and all those kinds of stuff happens. The BLM things happen a lot, and when I see that, it's interesting because you do not want, in that case, you can argue that UX principle is right in that specific one where the point of taking your phone out, taking a video, and shooting the like shooting as in not gun shooting, like shooting the video so the policeman doesn't shoot you, or so the whole experience or the whole intermediary, the product of using the camera, that's a means, and the end is protecting yourself because it's live feed and people can see it properly, right? So the end result is being protected, and and it's okay to have no friction in the process of taking the camera and everything. You don't want it to be like so complicated, like they have to do 10 different things to like you want to even possible like one click and it's a live Facebook feed where people everybody could see that somebody's attacking. And it makes sense to make the product invisible, but not in the case of an espresso, not even in the case where you make things like even in like the problem with like fake news is we make sharing so easy in articles, just like one click and you can share, that there is no friction in reading and sharing. In fact, when you have a Medium article, like a Medium, reading the article actually takes time. So there's a lot of friction, like a lot of the things you can go through to read the article. But sharing is actually way easier than reading the article. The sharing is just one click, but reading is done one click. You cannot click a button and your brain is just read everything. It's not possible. So what happens is it's a bad logic they have in media, which is or in general in media. Like reading is so much more has friction, but sharing is much less friction. So people or even like most people I would argue open all these articles and 100 tabs just to be able to share it, not really digest it, and that's okay. But with that what happens is you end up sharing a lot of stuff which is just like wrong. So friction is good if it pertains to end in itself, so which means that when something is an end in itself, so for example when you are actually want to say you're cooking something, right? If you think the process of cooking is the means and the final food is an end, I mean, that's a problematic way of thinking because the end, the eating, you should not want to uh, make it invisible and automatic. You want to like, whenever it comes to working with the people, working with the human being, you don't want it to be a something that is like no frictions. You don't even realize you talk to somebody or you work with somebody. You want that to be friction. So, for example, when you go to a restaurant, if you think that the waiters are working there are just a fiction, that's a terrible thing because they are people. So they should be. So whenever something is an end in itself, like a human being is an end in itself, there should be friction. So you cannot just like press a button and just automate the shit out of it. No, you want to take the time and talk. And this is also neoliberalism does not want to allow that kind of friction. It's like every friction is always bad. We want to smoothen everything. That's the idea. So we can be fast and we can like automate
Yeah,
everything.
I think
So
I think just to add to that,
no, no,
yeah,
sure.
there's in I mean in UX design, um, there is this general idea that yes, like friction is something that slows something down, but it takes it further and sees friction as something that slows something down that wants to be fast. Um, and so you will hear people in UX talk about good friction, but they'll only ever talk about it in cases like, for example, uh, like selecting your password or um, writing or storing your passphrase, your key phrase. What's it called in crypto? Your um,
Yeah, key phrase. Yeah,
anything,
yeah,
yeah,
mnemonic code. Yeah.
anything like that where the kind of weight of the decision or the weight of the action is quite heavy. Um, they they generally consider that to be a time of good friction, um, um, which is like seems like it's the same thing as what we're talking about here, but it is very limited in that it's only seen as like it's still using the word friction as a negative word, um, but it's kind of saying, well, sometimes it's good to be negative, um, um, where what we're saying is that friction is not a negative word. It's just a thing, right? It's just like a thing that's always there. Um,
So
yeah.
Amazon is a master of this because Amazon kind of pioneered the thing of they realize there's too much friction from the looking at the page, selecting things, putting your credit card, and just like buying it. They're like, why don't we just save credit cards, have the option? So they added it. They're like, still not enough. People still have to select a click on checkout and then say confirm. Why don't we do one click buy? So one click buy is like no friction, and that is like glorified in Silicon Valley. That kind of thing, Shopify and everywhere does this kind of thing, which is you remove friction so much that you make you like that's one of the best ways to scale your application. Like right now, many people criticize crypto for having so much friction, but the fact of the matter is it's not a bad thing because you're dealing with money. There should be friction. You shouldn't make it so easy that people end up losing money. So, for example, if betting is made frictionless, it would be terrible. Most people would lose too much money out of it. So
Mm.
this is why whenever friction is reduced, there's always a kind of a larger picture of who is removing friction for what particular motives.
Yeah. Can I just add something? This,
Of course. I mean, it's a conversation.
Anuj, your example of friction and money made me think of casinos and the design of casinos and the way the environment is built in a way to just keep people in this zone, right? Um,
Exactly.
where, yeah, everything is like automated. It's like
No
this
clock.
state
They
of
don't have a
flow,
clock.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, they don't even have a clock because clocks remind you how much time you have. That's one more friction. So everything is done
right,
even in a and they study that to death. The people who wrote the Bible for like gamification and removing friction in UX, they studied casinos to death actually in Stanford and other the 90s and all. So it's
right.
actually like it's so true. Like so much of it, like doom scrolling is another thing. Doom scrolling is so frictionless, like you just keep scrolling. But if like after a few scrolls you have to write a little something to make the scroll happen, people would just close the tab and not scroll anymore. So yeah, exactly. And so this is why, this kind of an idea that you see, where you see in crypto as well, the idea that they hate any intermediaries. Why? Because the intermediary is basically adding friction. Like I am paying you money. Why would somebody say Steve be the intermediary? It's friction. You don't want that. But what they don't understand is when they remove intermediary, they also remove mediation. Like they don't understand, they think there could be a message without any medium, any mediation, which of course, I mean, McLuhan 101, it's just not possible, right? Like any message will always have medium. The medium is the message. So whenever somebody removes an intermediary, like in the case of Bitcoin, they say they have no intermediary. What actually ends up happening is intermediaries get switched to some other deeper and unfortunately secret intermediary. So in the case of Bitcoin, there is the intermediary always of the code and the kind of the social regime that's always in place in Bitcoin that will not allow anybody to change the code. And they are constantly mediating and blocking and doing the rhetoric of do not change the code, do not change past transactions. It's not like God is making that happen or anything. So there is still like Bitcoin core team that is enforcing this kind of rule of law. So there's always a intermediary in place. It's never just me sending you money directly. Even when I am meeting you in person, holding a bill, like a dollar bill or something, and giving it to you, it's still the message that is passed that this is of value of $10 means you can buy something worth $10. Means I'm basically carrying on the and inviting the intermediaries of the state apparatus that legitimize this to be a money. It's not like I can make up a paper and just write $10 and give my own signature and give it to you. You'll be able to do nothing with that. There's always something other than the people interacting in a transaction, which is the intermediaries that mediate. There's always the medium, the message, right? So this is why it also becomes interesting that this whole conversation of means and ends of any means be mediating has to be a terrible thing. We want nothing to be there. Everything should be instant. It's more complicated than that, which is what we realize. And so This is like in like a typical conversation you see in kind of UX kind of places where they would be like, thinking like don't even give users a moment to think about what they're doing. So remove all friction. Like there should be no friction, or we do not want people to wake up from their doom scrolling slumber, so
Right, because
the
any of those moments allows people for disruption, basically. As
exactly,
I was thinking as a form of sabotage, disrupting the flow, right? Like
Yeah.
disrupting the supply chains kind of
yeah,
notion. Yeah.
exactly. Like the iPhone, all like modern devices have like slave mining and everything like that. But the entire process of you wanting a phone and getting the phone is so smooth that the supply chain is so invisible. That's why we don't realize the actual people working in like terrible situations. But if there were friction, then we would not look up. Why am I waiting 6 months for my phone? Yeah, because now I guess they have to like do all these checks and balances because some people never get paid for the work. Like things like that. So discomfort must be eliminated under all costs. Let the person on the other end stop using our products, and people are terrified of this. And as we have more and more overload of products and stuff and apps and goods and services, like capitalism has infinite capacity to produce stuff like every day, new and new ideas. So to survive in this world, every product has to at least intend to provide no friction. So once you have it, you just don't even stop thinking what it means to have it. So it's like an addictive kind of thing. And so when Elon Musk and thinks, they have global warming, he thinks global warming is a UX problem. Why? Because the way he looks at global warming, you think about it like, it's like this Earth is giving a terrible experience. We want to switch this product, the Earth, to a better product, Mars. Because for him, it's a fucking friction, this Earth. It's a bad product. We think we have to disintermediate this Earth and give, or even the transhumanists, they think like this entire body is the fucking friction. We want to be able to have mind-to-mind direct connection, put a chip in the brain, or even better, like why don't we actually operate our whole fucking consciousness on that? So what happens is this whole idea of friction and any mediation being bad is just at the heart of this idea. So if the humans are users and the earth is a product, it might as well, that gives you justification to think this earth is giving a bad experience to these users, which is humans, You don't think in a very different kind of way where evolutionary like you are part of the earth. It's not like the earth is just stuff that you're using every day, exploiting it or using it, right? It's doing a bad job now as a product. Mars might. So, so this is like very pertinent, this way of like thinking around friction, intermediary, the whole UX thing that comes out of it. So an alternative to that is to think in terms of design. And maybe, and I don't know, or see if you guys wanted to say something or just discuss. Uh,
No, so
I
far
can
so
go on.
good. Really, really good. Really interesting.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, continue.
Okay.
Sorry.
So design is much more than UX, or much different. So in UX, you see the two pillars is user experience. Whereas the problem with a user angle is that I am a user of Facebook or I am a user of LinkedIn or whatever, as long as I'm using that. But I am more than a user, I'm a person. But if LinkedIn only looks at me as a user, and that is the profile they have of me as a user, and they even do in the UX and user stories, like my whole, the experience, like from like wanting to connect and get a new job to using LinkedIn every day and all that, then they can never think of me as more than just somebody who uses their platform. So then they will always end up having to make me addicted to the platform, because as long as I'm addicted, I keep living as a user to them. Because they don't care about the time I spend hanging out with my friends, caring for my kids, hanging out with my wife, all those things. It's not of their concern. And that's okay, but it's just that if all they think of me as a user, it's very limiting. So it's already better to start thinking of people as people who have many roles, sometimes you use this and that. And the other angle of experience is problematic because if all that, if I am designing an app and all I care about is your experience, then what stops me from manipulating you to believe you have a good experience, even though you don't have? Because if experience is all that matters, if I put you in a kind of a matrix-like situation where you're like drugged or something and you have fantasies that you are in having ice cream and having good experience and all, but actually I'm draining all the blood and the life out of your body, you cannot object to me because if you ask, if somebody asks Anne, she'll be like, I'm having a great experience. So because so much of reality is beyond our experience, like they're beyond our consciousness, so much of it is we don't even aware of. And so much is it is not even our conscious, unconscious, so much is even beyond our scope of knowledge. Like there are things happening all over the world that affect the decisions that we take, all the political situations, geopolitics, this, that, and the other. That is just beyond experience. Experience is just stuff happening in my head, which is so limited. Me with my, it's a very individualistic neoliberal idea, this kind of experience fetishism, right? So both like user and experience is very problematic. And in fact, it opens the room for manipulating users because, I mean, if you care about experience of users, your question is not whether users' rights are being respected, say their rights about privacy and stuff, as long as the experience it as they are being private. So if I have to lie to them and tell them we are not tracking you, so your experience is good, it's good. As long as you don't find out, it's all good. That's experience, right? So it doesn't give us enough of a scope. So even the UX wants to do good, and that's the posture of UX is, we are about the experience of users. We want them to have a great experience. But the reality is very different. The reality is just like it actually design has to disavow the term UX. They need the new vocabulary design. And even in the term use is very problematic because I mean as long as I'm using something, there's a kind of hint is like I'm using it means I will stop using it. So what will I do at the end of use? I'll throw it. So instead of use, like it's never a good idea if I say I'm using it. I'm like, why would I use somebody? But if I say I am interested in something, if we say if you have more ecological terms like recycling or like deep engagement, these are very, I mean, engagement also very different ways used in UX. But these are like different ways of looking at it than just saying you. And what happens is, as long as we act as users, it goes to show, I mean, it makes sense that the companies who are making those apps will want to keep us stay users longer because they get their profit out of that. So we end up being used. I mean, we start using a tool, but then when we are so addicted to it because it's made in such a way that we remain as used, we are actually the one who gets used. So use is all this way. When we use and throw everything around us, like Elon Musk wants to not throw the Earth because it just cannot be used anymore. Let's go to Mars. He doesn't realize that it's actually, capitalism, larger powers, all of it is using him, is using us. So we need a more ecological design to foster recycle, care, autonomy, and and even the fact of user is just like it's insufficient because it's not. And this is more like anthropology, it's like is Marx and others, which is it's not just we value things when we use something, even if we use the word use. So money is a great example. We don't care about money for money's sake. We're not using money just for money. Money has use as long as it can be exchanged. So the value of money is not in the use. Like it's not like an apple which you actually use it by biting it and having sustenance and all. But money only has value as long as you can get some other thing that you can use. So as long as you can exchange for something that can be used, money has a value. So it's a kind of a stopgap. So there's also a kind of exchange value of things, not just use value of things, not just the value we get when we use something. So we are also exchangers of a lot of things. A lot of things we have as a kind of just we have it so we can exchange it for something else. Not even like we will never use it. We know it. Money, for example, is absolutely we never use money. We never like do anything with money except get the things that we did for. And even in that case, like there are things which are not even that we exchange it for or we use it for, but just that they have sentimental value. And I use the bracelet example because, like when our kids were born, they put the kind of a bracelet that has the name of the newborn, and we have kept the bracelet, and we intend to keep the bracelet, the thing they wore when the first day they were born, for the rest of their life. And it has no value. Nobody will want to buy it ever, right? Unless they become PR first, then it's the normal value, NFT that bracelet. But without that, it has absolute zero value. But things also have sentimental value. We just don't use things. We just never use it, but it's just there, right? So, and even in the case, like there are some things which are like has value, not even because we want to use it, not even because we can exchange something in for, not even because it has sentimental value, but just because it is close to something else that we need. So, for example, when you buy a computer, then you realize a mouse pad starts to have much more value because you have a computer. Then you realize a chair is ergonomic because you're sitting on a laptop, it's much more value. So there's a kind of a strange attraction that certain objects have towards others or invites others. Like, for example, chopsticks has a certain value when you have sushi, but you never, if you live in a country where sushi isn't available, you wouldn't value chopsticks. What do you do with chopsticks or sushi or anything that you eat with chopsticks? Say a mouse to a computer. So things also have a value by how they relate to each other. Like, or when we go to say IKEA, most of us do not just buy one table of IKEA. We end up buying, once you buy the table, you want to match the table with some chair and a couch, you want to match that. And then you end up having a whole set. So things also have a value in terms of how they're related to each other. And without that, it will just lose the value. And so this is why it's not just use or exchange of sentiments, but even connections, relationships, networks between objects give stuff value, right? And this is actually Baudelaire's work, Jean Baudelaire's work, and so using this Baudelaire's angle, we see that we are also like not just users, but exchangers, we are symbolizers, we are relationists. So we need a new anthropology of design that understand this kind of Baudelairean kind of angle of object, because it's system of object. Baudelaire.
Can I also add something?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Not just Baudelaire, but I'm also thinking of George Simmel and the way he theorizes on money, for example, where, like through this idea of fetishization, like Marxist idea of fetishization, where the relationships between things get removed, right? Like that's a big part of capitalism. It erases
Yes.
the relationships between things and makes things commensurable, basically,
Mhm, mhm.
adds its own value to it, whereas the original value of it, it's stripped out. So that kind of made me think of like what you were saying, just in terms of like abstracting things, right? Like in relation to capitalism.
Exactly. The reification that Marx would
Yes.
talk about. Exactly. Exactly. And this is why if you don't that's why just the user angle is completely not even insufficient. In a weird way, it serves a very good purpose of keeping us as like we become the users when we keep thinking, like we become the one used rather. If you don't see all this other, like what you just said, like how things get reified, how things are just for exchanging or symbolizing
This
or for relating.
this really reminds me of the theorization of ideology and the way we are like within ideology and we
Yeah,
cannot
yeah,
see
yeah.
outside of the ideology, just to bring in like Althusser's like theorization.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly,
Very-
exactly, exactly. Exactly. So exactly. And so this is why what happens is like design choices, if they don't consider this other like social reality of tech, what is beyond what is revealed in experience, because it's like the challenge is when even if you tell tech folks about this, they'll be like, but we took first-hand interviews of people, like users, and we have like user stories from them. They're all happy. And you have to then say it does not matter even what people say, because it's like Stockholm syndrome. Like you cannot ask them what they want because they are part of the ideology. So they don't know what it is. This is why theorists take a step back and do this kind of Althusser style or Baudrillard or this kind of style, like analysis, anthropological analysis that reveals things that are, because the thing is, these UX folks are themselves also users of some other products that they have in their life. So it's not like they are out of the thing. So how can they even see it? And neither are the users. They are part of this ideology. So we need a very different kind of politics of design. And so this is why the problem also happens is, even if designers start seeing some of these problems, they cannot even afford to, like, they cannot even psychologically allow themselves to go there here, because they will lose their jobs if they start questioning these things. Because even if you think what it, even if you want to so-called say benefit the user, as long as you're paid by your boss, you are financially beholden to benefit the boss, not the user. The user is not paying you directly. So you can never expect, like, people to jeopardize their jobs and do the right thing. And not even like expect, most of us won't be able to recognize that there is something, because we would, like, our mind will even like block us from seeing the truth of it because it's too scary. Then we would just suddenly stop being interested at work, and Steve and I are examples of that, you know. And so it just, you cannot do that. Probably, in my fantasy, I think maybe there could be a DAO for designers that could pay out dividends to all designers, at that kind of designer coin, things like that. You could think of it in the future, but at least doesn't exist so far. The current economics of design, where you just get a salary or you're in contract with the company and the company pays you. Of course, they who pay you, you have to preserve their interests over other people. Hold on, my son is yeah, and even to the point that we need, like, beyond that, like in doctors and Hippocratic oath, we need something like that, like an oath or something where designers would be like, you know, a new spirituality, like new kind of oath, like we would always do good. And it's not just saying that once, but it's also the whole culture of constantly, like happens in religious circles, like rituals and stuff, to remind people, like every day when you come, you see something at work, something printed or something designed, or some ritual you do in the morning, I don't know, preparing your equipment in a certain way, that remind you or inculcates this kind of a spirituality, this kind of a discipline, that you have an oath to understand, from an anthropological perspective, the deeper aspect. Like even if a business tells you to do something, like tells you to make the Wi-Fi connection, you'll be like, hold on, who is it benefited? What are we doing this? Tell you for users. You're like, okay, first they're not users, they're people, human beings who wake up and they're groggy, they want coffee. How is that got to do with a Bluetooth? Can send me, you would lose your job, of course. But if the economics was different, say you would not lose your job, there's DAO or something that pays, beholden. Then you also need this oath to always keep true to this kind of a promise that you want to do good, right? And this is why we need a new culture. So where we realize that designers have to remind each other of these things. And even to the point that, like, it's not just like some people who get to think of how to make an app or design an app, design as it are designers, because who is a designer? Like, we tend to think people who are programmers are the designers, which is weird because when you program, you do design a lot of things, like design algorithms and stuff. So, like, we need a different culture where we even talk about who is and how. Like, it shouldn't only be like some people are designers only, others are not designers. Rather, there should be some aspect of design that would should be in the vibe of like almost all kinds of, instead of just like thinking, I'm paying this person to do this job and I'm done, they're designers. So
So
this is
hang
why
on.
we,
Sorry,
so
sorry.
sorry,
I
yeah,
just want to
no,
say,
go ahead.
sorry. I
Hmm.
think a good economic model to think about this is maybe a gift economy, like more of like a gift economy kind of UX design, where people like, do you know what I'm saying? like
Yeah,
similar,
yeah. Exactly.
rather
Exactly
than
right.
like a
Yeah,
capitalist exchange, where you get something like, with commodities, you exchange something for a commodity, but having more of like a gift sharing economy where, you're
exactly. And
sharing.
I was thinking we could also have like, like you can gift, because the thing of gift is not liquid, or at least you don't think of it in terms of like what money. Like we don't value gifts because we can sell the gift for a certain amount. That then it's not a gift, right? So it's like, this is why I like the model of NFTs, because NFTs are like good like art and stuff, which is not just about money. It has become about money, unfortunately. So it would be very interesting to think in terms of like how users, like if designers thought we are gifting this amazing app to not users, to people who will interact with this, and they are also gifting their part of their life when they're interacting with it, and then other stakeholders in the company, developers, some are like business developers. That would be a more interesting and different kind of culture, different economics, different, and we need a different anthropology for that. So, like how we think of each other as humans, right? Yeah, exactly. And so that's why we need a new pedagogy in design, new way of like how we educate ourselves in matters beyond the design. Because if you see like UX people and designers and all, UX especially, they're obsessed with the methodologies that are fashionable. Like they would like fetishize about like, I don't know, different pencils and all different kind of colors. Like they like to think they're artists but working for a company. I'm not saying they're not artists or artists, but they certainly fetishize this kind of, we are artists at heart, art, not like just programmers and artists and all. But no, but we need a very different kind of like, it should be less obsessed about the tools that you need to make the sexiest app, but rather a big part of it should be about just this investigative methodologies where we can investigate our motives, our intentions, check and balance each other, question the politics behind these things. That is not at all, those things do not exist at all. It's all about like, can I be like incredibly fine looking, like addictive apps I can make? And they know they're obsessed with all these different methodologies they have of like allotting time, of doing the timetable, of buying the latest equipment to for screens, for paper, for pencil, for projector, all these things. It's not good or bad, but it just becomes like a fashion. Like everybody, all designers have a similar kind of toolkit that they use, and it's less about toolkits that are physical, but more about also the cultural elements, the economic elements, the political elements, that there should be like UX, like designers should also be kind of activists. Because if you're really designing and thinking of humans and people, you should be able to object to the board of directors and the stockholders think this is just like bad because you would not design these things, because we care about people. But you cannot do that if you just talk about experience, because you're like, as long as people don't realize the shit we are that the company wants us to do. So in fact, ironically, UX becomes the way capitalism ends up legitimizing itself, because UX just smoothens all the friction. So maybe if there were bad UX, people would realize capitalism is actually very rough around the edges. Because people don't complain, they love people. We all love capitalism because UX makes the experience amazing, right? The reality is not amazing. Like inequality starts looking very sexy thing. If you're a good UX designer, you would make that happen. And design without relying on gamification, without relying on flow, engagement tricks. So we need a new kind of psychology of design. That's not so. We need new reasons to design. That's it. That's the presentation.
Well done, Anush.
Thank you. That was great. That was great.